The Guatemalan Revolution, Spanish Revolución de Guatemala, was the period in Guatemalan history between the popular uprising that overthrew dictator Jorge Ubico in 1944 and the United States-orchestrated coup d'etat in 1954 that unseated President Jacobo Árbenz. It is also known as the 10 Years of Spring, highlighting the only years of representative democracy in Guatemala from 1930 until the end of the Civil War in 1996, and included a program of agrarian reform that was enormously influential across Latin America. From the late 19th century until 1944, Guatemala was governed by a series of authoritarian rulers who sought to strengthen the economy by supporting the export of coffee. Between 1898 and 1920, Manuel Estrada Cabrera granted significant concessions to the United Fruit Company, an American corporation that traded in tropical fruit, and dispossessed many indigenous people of their communal lands. Under Jorge Ubico, who ruled as a dictator between 1931 and 1944, this process was intensified, with the institution of harsh labor regulations and a police state too. In June 1944, a popular pro-democracy movement led by university students and labor organizations forced Ubico to resign. He appointed a 3-person military junta to take his place, led by Federico Ponce Valdes. This junta continued Ubico's oppressive policies until it was toppled in a military coup led by Jacobo Árbenz in October 1944, an event also known as the October Revolution. The coup leaders formed a junta which swiftly called for open elections. These elections were won in a landslide by Juan José Arevalo, a progressive professor of philosophy who had become the face of the popular movement. He implemented a moderate program of social reform, including a widely successful literacy campaign and a largely free election process, although illiterate women were not given the vote and communist parties were banned. Following the end of Arevalo's presidency in 1951, Jacobo Árbenz was elected to the presidency in a landslide. The progressive military leader of 1944 continued Arevalo's reforms and began an ambitious land reform program, known as Decree 900. Under it, the uncultivated portions of large land holdings were expropriated in return for compensation, and redistributed to poverty-stricken agricultural laborers. Approximately 500,000 people benefited from the decree. The majority of them were indigenous people, whose forebears had been dispossessed after the Spanish invasion. Árbenz's policies ran afoul of the United Fruit Company, which lost some of its uncultivated land. The company lobbied the US government for Árbenz's overthrow, and the State Department responded by engineering a coup under the pretext that Árbenz was a communist. Carlos Castillo Armas took power at the head of a military junta, provoking the Guatemalan Civil War. The war lasted from 1960 to 1996, and saw the US-backed military commit genocide against the indigenous Maya peoples, and widespread human rights violations against civilians,